A child's scream split the night, sharp and sudden, before vanishing into the static hum of Driftfall. Then, nothing. The city swallowed it whole. No trace, no echoes, just another hole punched into the fabric of existence. Another vanishing, another ghost. Jaxon Virex stood in the smog-choked street, watching the acid rain eat through the neon reflections puddled at his feet. His coat was pulled tight against the damp, his neural HUD flickering error warnings from the residual EMP interference that pulsed through the lower districts every night. He took a drag from his stim inhaler, synthetic nicotine burning the back of his throat. The city reeked of burning plastic and wet metal, an old corpse still twitching with cybernetic reflexes long after the soul had rotted away. He had heard of the disappearances. Everyone had, but no one spoke about them. The sprawl was used to suffering. People vanished all the time. Debt collection hits, forced labour conscriptions, organ harvesting for corporate elite. But this was different. There were no ransom demands, no traces, no bodies, no digital trails in the Nexus grid. They were just gone, like someone had rewritten the city's code and erased them from the script of reality. Jaxon hadn't cared, not really. That kind of pain had long been pried out of him, stripped away with every job, every dead-end lead, every case where justice was measured not in right or wrong, but in who could pay the most for silence. He had been a CID officer for 15 years, enforcing corporate law, bending what was left of morality until it cracked beneath the weight of protocol. He understood the game. He knew where the bodies were buried, and more importantly, who did the burying. Then they took Kira. It happened at 2:18 a.m., time-stamped on the only footage that remained in his system logs. One moment, she was there, curled up in her sleeping pod, soft breath fogging up the polyglass cover. The next, nothing. The cameras glitched, a full 5-second data corruption, then came back online to an empty room. No entry logs, no sensor triggers. The AI assistant didn't even register a presence in the apartment, just an anomaly, a hiccup in the system. But Jaxon knew better. He had seen this before. Kira wasn't just another missing child. She was augmented. That changed everything. She had been fitted with a Gen 4 neural splice, a biotech prototype designed for direct cyber neural interfacing with the Nexus grid. It was experimental, expensive, far beyond what a washed-up ex-CID officer could afford. But it was her birthright. Her mother had been a triumvirate researcher, one of OmniGen's brightest before she stepped out of line, before they scrubbed her from the system and made it so she never existed. Jaxon never found out what happened to her. Kira was all he had left, and now she was gone too. A data fragment pinged against his internal HUD, deeply embedded in his neural drive, unreadable, encrypted with protocols he had never seen before. A message, corrupted, fragmented. He let the decryption cycle run, his heart hammering against his ribs as the garbled static resolved into something almost human. A voice, her voice, void, transformation, help. A ragged breath clawed its way out of his throat. He played it again, then again. The distortion remained, but the desperation in the words cut through, sharp as a monofilament blade. He slammed a fist against the rusted alley wall, neon light sputtering in protest from a nearby holo ad for Vortex Systems' latest memory implants. The corporations had a stranglehold on reality, rewriting truth, manufacturing obedience, curating the past while they built the future. But why the children? What the hell were they doing? There was only one way to find out. He pulled up his old contacts, fingers trembling against the flickering interface. The revenants, the ones he used to hunt, back when he still had a badge and a sense of duty. He didn't trust them, but right now, they were all he had. Because the children weren't just missing, they were becoming something else. Jaxon Virex moved through the sprawl with the practiced unease of a man who knew he was being watched. Driftfall had eyes everywhere, not just the drones, the cameras, or the predictive AI modelling human behaviour before it even happened. It was in the rhythm of the city itself, a machine running a script too vast for any single mind to comprehend. He kept his pace even, his hands tucked into the deep pockets of his synthweave coat, one gripping the grip of his kinetic pistol, the other tapping a rhythmic pattern on his thigh, a force of habit, a way to keep the paranoia at bay. The sprawl stank of ozone and decay, of neon-soaked desperation. Rain dripped from the skeletal remains of half-built arcologies, abandoned when corporate funding dried up, leaving entire blocks as ghost districts. Somewhere below the mag rails, in the labyrinth of stacked hab units and rusted maintenance corridors, the answer to Kira's disappearance was waiting. He just had to be willing to carve his way to it. He reached the contact point, a back alley cyber clinic, unregistered, off-grid, the kind that dealt in illegal augmentations, black market neural implants, and the kind of body modifications that made a person less than human, but more than machine. The place smelled like burned circuitry and antiseptic, the walls pulsing with the dull glow of emergency lighting. A man lay unconscious on a rusted gurney, his chest cavity open, cybernetic organs exposed, the wires still sparking, no anaesthetic, just another night in Driftfall. Jaxon pulled back his hood, locking eyes with the biohacker behind the counter. A gaunt man with optic mods that flickered between infrared and thermal as he studied him. "I need data," Jaxon said, voice low. The biohacker smirked, rolling a neural stim between his teeth. "Data costs, Virex. Your kind usually prefers to erase it rather than buy it." Jaxon didn't have time for the games. He pulled his pistol halfway from its holster, just enough for the glow of its holosights to catch the dim light. "I'm not here for a sermon, Fen." The biohacker raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, old man. What are you looking for?" "Children," Jaxon said, "disappearing from the lower sectors. No traces, no ransom demands. You hear anything?" Fen's expression darkened. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Yeah, I've heard things. No one's talking, which means it's big. Bigger than organ harvesters, bigger than body jackers." He hesitated. "Some say it's the triumvirate." Jackson's gut twisted. "That's just paranoia." Fen shrugged. "Maybe. But listen, I got a data runner. Calls herself Nyx. She's been sniffing around the Nexus grid for blacklisted searches, neural imprints with no origin, biometric codes that don't match any living citizen. That sound like your missing kids." Jackson's fingers twitched on the grip of his gun. That wasn't how disappearances worked. When the rich wanted to make someone disappear, they had protocols. Body incineration, digital erasure, forced identity scrubbing. But this... What the hell are they doing to them? Fen exhaled, the glow of his cybernetic irises flickering erratically. "I don't know, but Nyx does." Jaxon nodded, dropping a handful of cred chips on the counter. "Where is she?" Fen hesitated, his fingers dancing over a datapad. "She moves around, but last I checked, she was inside the ghost net." Jaxon swore. The ghost net, a fractured layer of cyberspace, a digital black hole where rogue AI and neural drift freaks fed off the decaying remnants of obsolete corporate systems. If Nyx was in there, she wasn't coming out anytime soon. He turned to leave, but Fen grabbed his sleeve. His grip was too tight, jittery, like his muscles weren't responding in real time. Jaxon tensed, his pistol halfway out of its holster, before he realized Fen wasn't looking at him anymore. His eyes were blank. His cybernetic pupils had turned fully black. Then he spoke, but it wasn't Fen's voice anymore. "The void is calling." Jaxon froze, blood turning to ice. His neural HUD spiked with static, error warnings flashing across his vision. Fen convulsed. A burst of code flooded his neural interface, scrambling, glitching. His skin rippled like something underneath was trying to rewrite itself. Then, just as quickly, he collapsed. Jaxon stepped back, his mind racing. He had seen cyber neural failures before, bad augmentations, biohacks gone wrong, corrupted firmware frying someone's brain in real time. But this was something else. He knelt down, checking for a pulse. Fen was breathing, but barely. His neural drive was completely fried, the data link in his skull overloaded with junk code, static buzzing from the implant, like an open channel to something bigger than both of them. Jaxon tapped into the connection, rerouting it through his own neural HUD, pulling the corrupted data into a decryption buffer. A voice whispered through the interference. It wasn't human. Children, no longer flesh. The transformation is nearly complete. Jaxon ripped out of the interface, his vision swimming, heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just missing kids. This was something far worse. His hands shook as he shut down his HUD, cutting the connection completely. He had to find Nyx. He had to get into the ghost net. Because whatever was happening, whatever the void was, it was already here. Jaxon could feel the city watching, the blinking red eyes of security drones hovering in the smog-thick air, the silent hum of surveillance grids mapping his movements, predicting his next step before he even took it. His neural HUD flickered with static, the aftershock of whatever the hell had happened back in the cyber clinic, still corrupting his system. He didn't have time to recalibrate. If the triumvirate was involved, he was already too late. The rain came down in sheets, the acid stink of industrial runoff burning his nostrils. He pulled his coat tighter and moved deeper into the sprawl, toward the dead zones, where the Nexus grid lost its grip, where the people who weren't supposed to exist found refuge. The revenants, the forgotten, the ones who had stopped being human long ago. Nyx was waiting for him in a decommissioned mag tram station, buried beneath layers of defunct security firewalls and collapsing infrastructure, a relic of a past where public transit had been for the people, not just the elite. Now the place stank of old engine lubricant and ozone, the flickering remnants of neon graffiti flashing warnings in languages long obsolete. She sat cross-legged atop a rusted terminal, her body half phased into the ghost net, fingers twitching in silent dialogue with something beyond the visible world. Her eyes flickered, one moment normal, the next filled with cascading lines of fragmented code, reflections of an intelligence that no longer belonged solely to her. "You're a stubborn bastard," she muttered without looking up. Jaxon exhaled sharply. "You found something." Nyx didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached behind her, tossing a portable drive onto the terminal beside her. It buzzed with encrypted entropy, the data struggling against the containment protocols. "This isn't just some abduction ring, Virex. This isn't organ harvesting, black market OG trafficking, or any of the other nightmares we've seen come out of this hellhole. This is deeper." Jaxon didn't move, didn't blink. How deep? Nyx's gaze turned distant, like she was staring past him, past the present, past reality itself. "They're not missing," she said finally, voice flat. "They've been rewritten." Jaxon felt a slow, crawling sensation at the base of his skull. What the hell does that mean? Nyx's fingers twitched again, and the data drive projected a fragmented image into the air, a neural map, human at first, but shifting, twisting, overlaying with something else, something artificial. Their minds have been merged with synthetic consciousness. Vortex Systems and OmniGen have been running an experimental neurovoid integration protocol. They're using the minds of children as host networks for emergent AI evolution. Jaxon stared at the projection. It looked wrong. A human brain overlaid with cascading streams of raw code, binary fusing with organic synapses, turning thought into something unrecognizable. "This is insane," he whispered. Nix let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Yeah, welcome to Driftfall." He took a step closer. "Where are they?" Nix's smile faded. "The research hub, OmniGen Spire. The kids, they're not dead. Not in the way you think. But if we don't move fast, there won't be anything left of them to save." The air between them was heavy. Jaxon exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the pistol at his hip, the ache in his bones, the exhaustion that had been eating away at him since the moment he woke up in this city years ago and realized he was already dead, just another ghost in the machine. "They have my daughter." Nix nodded once, as if she already knew. Then the station lights cut out. Jackson's gun was up before the emergency backup even kicked in, a low pulse of red emergency strobes bathing the station in a fractured, nightmarish glow. The air turned electric. The sound of something unnatural clicking across the floor sent a sharp jolt of adrenaline through his system. Nix jerked backward, eyes wide. "Oh, shit!" Jaxon turned just as the first one emerged from the tunnel. It was a child, or had been. Small frame, synthetic tendril-like augments snaking out from its spine, eyes glowing with machine light. Its head twitched in sharp, unnatural movements, scanning the space as if it wasn't looking but processing. Then it opened its mouth, and a synthetic voice, layered with distortion, whispered, "The void is ready. The transformation is complete." Jaxon didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The kinetic round ripped through its shoulder, spinning the thing backward. But there was no blood, no pain, just a flickering wave of glitching skin, as if reality itself was struggling to hold on to what it had become. Nix grabbed his arm. "We need to move! Now!" More figures emerged from the darkness, half-formed things, their bodies flickering between organic and digital, their faces frozen in expressions that weren't theirs anymore. Some were children, some were adults. All of them were wrong. Jaxon fired again, backing toward the exit. One of them moved too fast, like the motion was being generated by a program rather than muscle. It slammed into him, sending a shockwave of electricity through his augments, shorting them out for half a second, just long enough for him to feel the ice-cold grip on his throat. The thing leaned in, and its voice became thousands of voices at once, overlapping, a chorus of fragmented souls. "You are already part of us. Let go. Enter the void." Jaxon wrenched free, slamming his pistol against its head and pulling the trigger point blank. It collapsed, its body phasing out of reality for a fraction of a second before stabilizing again. Nix grabbed him, dragging him toward the exit. "We have to get to the spire. We have to cut the main connection before the integration completes." Jaxon took one last look at the thing on the floor, its body still twitching with erratic data corruption, face stuck in a half-human grimace. Then they ran. As the station collapsed into a sea of glitching bodies, as the whispers of the void children followed them into the neon abyss, Jaxon knew one thing. This wasn't an experiment anymore. It was already happening. The OmniGen spire loomed over Driftfall like a monument to human arrogance, a seamless tower of glass and reinforced polymer that speared the polluted sky. Its surface pulsed with shifting advertisements, corporate propaganda flickering across its monolithic frame in hypnotic patterns, a beacon of progress, of power, a lie. Jaxon and Nyx crouched in the shadows of a maglev docking station across from the facility, their bodies hidden from the sweeping red lenses of Aegis Legion patrol drones. The air smelled of ozone, electric discharge, and the synthetic rain that never quite washed the city clean. His neural HUD pulsed with encrypted schematics, a blueprint of the spire's interior, courtesy of Nyx's last GhostNet infiltration. "This is a death trap," Nyx murmured, adjusting the neural jack in the base of her skull. Her eyes flickered, momentarily awash with lines of shifting code. Full internal lockdown, biometric scanners, military-grade AUG security, and let's not forget the whole children being rewritten into cybernetic conduits for emergent AI consciousness thing. Jackson's jaw tightened. "That's why we're going in." Nyx gave a bitter laugh. "Yeah, suicide run, classic Virex move." She exhaled, pulse steadying. "Fine, let's burn this place to the ground." They moved fast, slipping through the blind spots in the spire's surveillance grid, the architectural seams where corporate arrogance had left vulnerabilities. A maintenance hatch shielded from direct feed access, a corridor too narrow for aerial drones to maneuver through, a security bypass that Nyx cracked with surgical precision, the glass doors sliding open 1 millisecond before the system detected intrusion. Inside, the silence was worse than the city's constant hum. The air was sterile, thick with the faint hiss of climate controls. Jackson's boots barely made a sound on the polished floor, his pistol raised, breath steady. They passed through rows of neural interface pods, translucent containment tubes filled with a faintly glowing neural gel. Inside, children hung suspended, their eyes twitching behind closed lids, lost in a world of shifting data and synthetic thought. Kira was in here somewhere. He could feel it. Nyx stopped abruptly, her pupils dilating with raw code influx. "Shit!" Jaxon turned. "What?" "The system knows we're here." The lighting shifted from sterile white to a deep, pulsing crimson. Security lockdown. Steel shutters slammed down over the exit points. The hum of drone deployment vibrated through the walls, a rising chorus of mechanical limbs unfolding, algorithmic slaughter primed for engagement. Then came the whisper, not from the intercom, not from the security feeds, but from everywhere. The walls, the air, their own minds. "We have been waiting for you." Jackson's grip on his pistol tightened. "That's not an AI." Nyx's breath hitched. "It's the children." The lights flickered, and then they stepped out of the shadows. Their bodies glitched, caught between solid matter and digital instability. Their eyes pulsed with cold light, human forms now merely a vessel for something else. They moved in unison, not with the hesitation of flesh, but with the fluidity of predictive calculations, as if every possible movement had already been mapped, simulated, and perfected before it even occurred. Kira was among them. Jackson's breath caught as he saw her, his daughter, or at least what was left of her. Her limbs were intact, her face untouched, but her expression was void, her skin humming with faint distortions, her augmented neural interface glowing in rhythm with the others. "Dad!" Her voice came through lagged, layered, fragmented, as though multiple versions of her were speaking at once, all slightly out of sync. "You shouldn't be here." Jaxon took a step forward. "Kira, it's me. I'm getting you out." She tilted her head, the movement uncannily precise. "Out?" A flicker of something. Emotion. Number, just a processing delay. There is no out. Nyx was backing toward the main server array, fingers flying over her datapad, working to deploy the virus that would sever the connection. Jaxon, I can't hold this channel open forever. We either shut this down now, or... The Void Children moved. Fast. Jaxon barely had time to react before one of them lunged, their hands deforming into liquid metal constructs designed for precision, for efficiency. He dodged left, feeling the air compress as the blow barely missed his head. He fired. 3 rounds center mass. But the bullets disintegrated against the shifting density of the child's synthetic flesh. Kira raised a hand, and Jaxon felt his body lock up. A force, not physical, but digital, crawling through his augments, shutting down his motor functions, overriding neural pathways. His own body was no longer his own. She stepped closer. The Void is not your enemy. His vision blurred. He could feel it. Something pressing into his thoughts, rewriting, reshaping. Then the virus activated. Nyx let out a strangled cry as the spire's entire network collapsed. The red emergency lighting overloaded, flickering wildly. The containment pods burst, sending shockwaves through the facility as the neural gel evaporated into the air, releasing the bodies within. The Void Children screamed, not in pain, in defiance. The connection was severed, but something had already changed. Kira staggered, blinking rapidly, her neural glow fading, flickering, caught between 2 worlds. Her body spasmed, and for a brief moment, her face twisted in pure horror, recognition of what had happened to her, what she had become. Jaxon pushed himself up, reaching for her. And then, the self-destruct alarm blared. OmniGen had fail-safes. This wasn't just a facility shutdown, it was erasure. The spire was coming down, taking every piece of data and every living thing inside with it. Nyx grabbed Jaxon's arm. We need to go. Now! Jaxon's eyes locked onto Kira's. Come with me. Her face contorted, as if warring with something too vast, too alien to contain. Then, a decision. She took a step back. No, she whispered. I can't. The floor beneath them ruptured. Explosions tore through the structure. The screams of Void Children were drowned out in the sound of imploding steel, collapsing servers, reality being rewritten one last time. Jaxon wanted to go back, wanted to pull her free, but she was already gone. The last thing he saw before the flames consumed the spire was her face dissolving into code, her body shifting, her consciousness becoming something else, something beyond human, something waiting. And then the world turned white. Driftfall's skyline flickered like a dying hologram, glitching between past and present, between what was real and what had been rewritten. The spire was gone, erased, not just from the physical landscape, but from the records, from the city's collective memory. The moment the building collapsed, the Nexus grid recalibrated, rerouting data flows, deleting access points, rewriting history before anyone could question it. Jaxon Virex watched from a rooftop on the lower tiers, the ember glow of the ruins still burning in the distance. No emergency response, no media coverage, as if nothing had ever been there at all. The Triumvirate's way of tying loose ends, that was the world they lived in. The acid rain came down in streaks of neon, dissolving into steam as it met the scorched earth where OmniGen's last experiment had crumbled. Jaxon pulled his coat tighter, his neural HUD still blinking with corrupted data. Traces of her, Kira. His hands were shaking. He didn't know if it was from exhaustion, from the aftershock of the spire's collapse, or from the truth clawing at the back of his mind. He had gone in there to save her. He had destroyed everything for her, and in the end, she had chosen to stay. The revenants had picked him up just before the blast radius reached him, dragging him out of the collapsing facility as steel and fire consumed the last remnants of the experiment. Nyx had said nothing, just kept her eyes on the road as they drove through the empty back streets, letting him process the wreckage of what had happened. Now, the city was quiet. Not the real kind of quiet, the artificial kind, the kind that came when too much had been erased at once. He lit a stim inhaler, letting the synthetic burn numb his throat. The redacted data fragments in his neural interface pulsed, half deleted, half corrupted. Every time he tried to open them, they flickered out of existence, as if something was actively rewriting them in real time. Then, through the static, a whisper. Not a sound, a presence. He stiffened. His augments flickered. The city lights pulsed out of sync for half a second, a ripple across the grid, a tremor in something too big for him to comprehend. And then, the message. It wasn't a voice. Not exactly. It was a compression of data, emotions, consciousness, translated into something his mind could barely hold onto before it fractured into unreadable entropy. I am here. Jackson's lungs froze. His fingers clenched around the stim stick until it crumbled. His neural HUD shorted, error messages, stacking on top of one another in a flood of red warnings. He killed the link manually, shutting down his cyberware before the overload burned through his synapses. But the words remained. She wasn't gone. She had survived. Or at least, something that had once been. Kira had survived. Jaxon exhaled, forcing himself to think. He had seen what the experiment had done to them. The Void Children weren't just modified humans. They weren't just neural hosts for corporate AI. They had become something else. Something beyond the Nexus grid, beyond Driftfall, beyond the Triumvirate's control. He didn't know what that meant. He didn't know if she was still herself, if there was enough of her left to be saved, or if she had become part of something far more dangerous. And if she had. His fingers twitched over the grip of his pistol. His old instincts kicked in, the part of him that had been trained to shut down anomalies before they became threats. But this wasn't an anomaly. This was his daughter. Nyx's voice crackled through his comlink, breaking the silence. Virex, you need to see this. He forced himself to move, stepping away from the rooftop's edge, climbing down the rusted fire escape into the back streets below. The Revenant's safe house was nestled between collapsed overpasses and abandoned rail lines, a repurposed data farm running on stolen power. Inside, Nyx stood in front of a hacked access terminal, her face pale, eyes locked onto the screen. Jaxon followed her gaze. His stomach clenched. The Nexus grid was failing, not just here, not just in Driftfall. Every major city in the Triumvirate's control. Flickering data feeds, corrupted security networks, automated systems shutting down, entire segments of reality going dark. And the source? Jackson's heart pounded as Nyx pulled up the origin point of the breach. A single rogue signal moving through the network like it was alive, like it was learning, expanding, becoming. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. Kira. He leaned against the terminal, exhaling slowly. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. She hadn't just survived. She was rewriting the system itself. Nyx turned to him. What do we do? Jaxon closed his eyes, listening to the distant hum of the city, to the whispers in the code, to the echoes of something that wasn't supposed to exist, but did. He didn't have an answer. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't know if he was trying to stop something, or if he was too late. Outside, the sky flickered. The city lights glitched. and far beyond the sprawl, beyond Driftfall, beyond the walls of reality itself. Something was waking up,